Siaya, 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 siaya.
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and I'm with Memetlwe Sebei. He's the president of the General Industrial Workers Union of South Africa, and he is in a struggle, as his members are, at Clover Dairy, which is the largest dairy company in South Africa. They've been on strike, and against an Israeli multinational. And we're also coming up in MayDay in South Africa, climate catastrophe in Durban, the food crisis because of the Ukraine war. There are a lot of struggles facing the working class. Why don't you talk about the strike now in Clover, the struggle of the workers there, and the general economic and political situation for South African workers in MayDay 2022?
Thank you very much, Comrade Steve, and thank you to comrades in the US and across the world that have stood with us and have continued to support us, in a strike against Clover, but also, in many other struggles happening here. Now, of course, the strike now is in its 6 months. Obviously, that's an extremely, long period, and I think, as you can imagine, that the situation is extremely complicated with workers not having been earning for that long. It is very clear that for geopolitical considerations, the company is not going to back down, even when the strike, from an economic point of view, doesn't make sense for them to dig the heels as they have. I think the fear, more than just the workers of Clover, is united, international solidarity of the working class, that if we win against Zionist imperialism in Clover, it will set an example of how the working class, in solidarity with the people of Palestine, can defeat Zionist investments across the world. And I think for that reason, their shareholders are willing to bankroll the company to the tune of billions without an end to wear out the workers and so on. As for the union, we are, clear we are not going to sign that rotten deal that they have on the table. But of course, we have had to, we are re-evaluating our tactics, whether we shouldn't allow, sections of the workers back so that we, get a breathing space in order to re-energize, in order to regain our fighting capacity, to continue the war that is certainly going to be a very prolonged one. Of course, that is under discussions between, ourselves as leadership of the union and the workers, and I think there's an openness to that. Where we say to workers, maybe you can, as individuals, take what is on the offer, and the union officially remain on a strike, so that we are able then to continue. And when the opportunity allowed to escalate, through series of actions that we are contemplating. In terms of the general political situation in the country, it's nothing really, just to say, for instance, in terms of the political situation, it is a very complicated conjuncture. I think that's the only way to characterize the phase that we are passing through. Because what are we dealing with? We are dealing with a march, on the one hand, of a counter-revolutionary, reactionary undercurrent of xenophobia that, has always been there. And I think from time to time, rear its ugly head. And we've seen that, taking more organized form in what is now called Operation Dudula, in a way that we have not seen before. And I think that this Operation Dudula, in my view, represents the bigger threat to the organized working class than any other thing, because what the conditions that gives rise to, and what are those conditions? The deepening levels of unemployment, the deepening levels of poverty, and of course now the deepening crisis of climate change, which manifested itself in the most bloodiest fashion in Durban, where almost 400 lives have been lost and many more are missing, and of course a catastrophic devastation in terms of infrastructure that is going to take us years, if not decades, to be able to rebuild. Houses, roads, public facilities like schools, clinics, and all the things and so on have all been, washed away in that flood and so on. And of course, there is just a collapse of society at all levels. Because, obviously the crisis in the economy necessarily translate into crisis at all levels of society, at the level of the family, because, already we see, with the, astronomical levels of gender-based violence. I was also looking at the statistics released by, Statistics South Africa, and it says that only about 31% of Black fathers are, there in the lives of their children. And I think that speaks to the intensity of the crisis, that when millions and millions, of fathers, of mothers are retrenched, that tears, families apart, and that tears the whole fabric of society apart. And I think xenophobia, gender-based violence, and violence between sections of the working class is a manifestation of that deepening crisis. At a political level, the ruling class has no solutions. The ANC, which is the ruling party, is in a bloody factional war, because there is no any other way really of describing the state of war or the state of factional politics within the ANC. Each and every week, when you read the newspapers, when you read the, when you look at the news, there's some member of the ANC killed by others in, during the meetings and so on. And, it's just really a bloody factional civil war between different gangsters of the political elite, fighting over the loot, fighting over the plunder, and access to power that they use for their own enrichment, and of course for the advancement of various sections of the capitalist class that they represent. So that's the situation, but that none of the political parties have no solution is reflected in the fact that they've also jumped on the bandwagon, of Operation Dudula, of the xenophobic movement. Because one day feature of this current wave of xenophobic mobs and violence is that it has had a support of almost all the mainstream parties, from the ruling ANC, to Patriotic Alliance, Action South Africa, but also sections of the DA, which is a white liberal party. The Action 8 itself is a split from that party. It was only after the leader split from them that they tried to distance themselves from xenophobia. The EFF that itself has, by and large, condemned the Operation Dudula itself, has engaged in acts of xenophobia, going to restaurants and other industries that are seen to be employing more migrants, saying that they are looking for papers, saying that they are asking employers why are they employing more migrants than locals. So they are capitulating to the mood. But the unfortunate thing also is that the same sentiment or the same pressures are being exerted on the labor movement, that sections of the leadership of the labor movement thinks, well, if you are seen to be reasonable in terms of accommodating some of what they consider to be very genuine issues that have been raised by these reactionaries on the issues of violence, on the issues of jobs, you can be able to win, the best of them, if we can use that language, over when in fact you simply legitimize them, and in any event you don't answer the questions around the deepening levels of unemployment, the deepening poverty of the working class, which affect even those that are currently employed. And the thing about that is that the lowering conditions of employment and the brutalization of the working class in this period, will only be aided by disenfranchisement of the vast sections of the working class. The capitalist, you can never give a capitalist a better gift than workers without rights. And when you strip migrants of their rights, that's exactly what you do. You render them, you hand them over to the most ruthless forms of exploitation that will only aggravate even further the brutalization of the rest of the working class. So that overall is a situation, and I think that is a character and the main features of the period that we are passing through, Steve, in South Africa.
And this accumulation of wealth, I mean, South Africa is a very wealthy country, tremendous resources, gold, minerals, yet the poverty is increasing. Like the United States, the middle class, the working class is being disenfranchised. How do you see uniting the working class in South Africa? Because even in this strike of Clover, the government basically approved a Zionist multinational taking over a company while the government says they're against Zionism.
I'll argue, Steve, that in many ways, Clover itself, shines a light of how we can unite, various sections of the working class. Because what we have seen in Clover is an unprecedented level, of support from ordinary working class communities, middle class, progressive middle class people that are obviously appalled by what Melco want to impose on its workers, but also the Zionist policies of Israeli imperialism against oppressed people of Palestine. The reports that are coming out, and of course we've used the strike at Clover, to bring out stories of evictions, of displacement, of brutalization under that very brutal, Israeli military occupation of Palestine. So that level of unprecedented support shows that it is possible when there's a program that shows, for instance, that the attacks on the workers at factory levels and how does it relate with the situation, for instance, of unemployment, because we hammer the fact that the restructuring that entails factory closures at Clover are going to aggravate levels of unemployment. That workers of Clover now are more compared to, join the unemployed in the queues for public housing when they are working for some of the big companies and they should be able to afford to buy their own housing. So all of that, I think, resonated very well. However, and I think it was also very clear the way that we linked the colonial policy of Israeli imperialism in Palestine with the brutalization here of the Clover workers, how it mobilized the international working class solidarity in the US, in Europe, in the Middle East itself, across the continent. This strike just enjoyed unprecedented level of international working class solidarity and support, perhaps than any other struggle that I know since 1994. Since 1994, and certainly since the Marikana massacre in 2012. But also there are many examples as well. Look at this deepening crisis of climate change, right? The people in Durban obviously have lost lives, and people are demanding answers, rightfully so. And what are we saying in Durban? That what the flooding there exposed is shown light on the years of corruption, of plunder of public resources, because the billions that was supposed to build an infrastructure that we need, from housing to water, stormwater management systems, in our roads, the emergency services that we need. All of those billions have been siphoned off, have been plundered by the elite, particularly in KZN, which even by the standards of the rotten ANC is at another level. You have the ANC Regional Congress there just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, re-electing a former mayor in that city who is facing 2,000 counts of corruption and fraud in charges, criminal charges. Now, what is the ANC saying? It's showing a middle finger, on the people of Durban. It's showing the middle finger on the working class and the poor who are suffering from the consequences of this plundering and all of that. But at the same time, the country continues to be reliant on fossil fuel, both for oil. I mean, we have one of the most dirtiest polluters, in terms of the oil producers here, which is a formerly state-owned oil company called Sasol. Now, it has a unique technology of, squeezing a coal to generate oil. So they have this coal to oil technology that makes Sasol, a single most polluting piece of equipment in the whole world. That is in addition to the fact that over 80% of our electricity is also generated from coal. And this means South Africa, from the last time I checked, it was responsible for about 45% of the greenhouse emissions in the country. So you have that issue. At the same time, electricity is becoming more and more unaffordable for big sections of the working class. Since 2007, when the crisis started, to 2020, the electricity tariffs have increased by 512%. Last year by 15%, this year by 9.6%. The price of fossil fuel, of oil, is also becoming more and more unaffordable. Petrol by 32% since last year, diesel 37%, and of course, paraffin just is a fallback for many people that are forced off the grid, by increasing tariffs for electricity. It has increased by 52% between now and last year. Obviously, the war in Ukraine is a factor. Now, what is posed in this situation is the possibility of the unity between ordinary people of KZN that are suffering devastation from the floods and others in other parts of the country who have had to endure over half a decade of a devastating drought that killed livestock, that plunged many areas across the country into levels of unprecedented poverty. On the one hand, on the other hand, is ordinary people that also are more and more suffering from energy poverty, both from unaffordability of fuels, of oil, of fuels, but also others that even for domestic use can afford electricity. So at the same time, we have an issue of workers that are being retrenched. Thousands of them are facing retrenchments from the coal mines, from the state energy utility ESCOM, as part of the restructuring. So in this whole project, we have put a program to say, we want a new green, ESCOM, which can create more jobs instead of shedding, by training and reskilling workers, to do to roll out an energy based on clean, green renewables, of which there's plenty in this country. We have an all year round sunshine. We have the longest coast that stretch from Namibia all the way to Mozambique. That is enough to generate through a wind power, electricity to supply the entire country. So we can unite the climate justice movement with ordinary working class people that are suffering floods, with working class people that are demanding accountability on monies that have been stolen from, a public service, people that want energy prices, workers that are facing retrenchments, and of course, better wages, the struggle for better wages at ESCOM and so on. And mining affected communities that want the just transition, not just for their local economy to be devastated. So these are some of the realities. And I think what you need is an organization that can bring all of these struggles together. And that's the reason for us, the question of the mass political party of the working class is absolutely essential, is more urgent than ever before, and is a task that we can't afford to postpone.
And the workers in the Bay Area, the teachers, are fighting school closures, are fighting privatization, charter schools. In Oakland, they're going to be going on strike on Friday. And they're joining with the longshoremen, the ILW longshoremen, who face privatization of the Port of Oakland. for a billionaire, John Fisher, who owns the A's and the Gap Corporation, and wants to take over the port for a stadium and $3,000 million condos, and wants to get $850 million tax money. So the issue of privatization, the fight against privatization, the unity of the working class against privatization, and the Democratic Party here, who are pushing privatization, like the Ramaphosa and the government of South Africa, pushing privatization of nationalized resources. It seems there's a growing unity of workers globally to fight privatization, to fight the disenfranchisement of the working class through privatization of public resources. It seems like on MayDay, the struggles that are uniting the working class are growing.
Yes, Steve. And I think, I mean, I've seen, the struggles in the US. And I think for me, one of the most incredible feature of the past 2 years has been, the rise into its feet of the mighty American working class that has been, or at least it felt like it has been, sleeping forever. I mean, from the Black Lives Matter movement that was the biggest movement, across the world in 2020, but also a wave of teacher struggles last year. And I think, few months ago or few weeks ago, the incredible and marvelous victory of the Amazon workers who have managed to unionize. And I think that to us is nothing short of an incredible inspiration, because obviously, if the American working class was to take its rightful place in a worldwide working class movement, it will save all of us the biggest challenge of an American imperialism that is policing the struggles of the working class everywhere. If we could be able to overthrow American imperialism in America itself, I think the threat that the international working class is really facing would really, they would have lifted, I think over 60% of our problem, if you like, because you can see, they are having army bases here just next door in Botswana. There is now almost a state of civil war that is developing in that country, and they're doing nothing about it. Obviously, as I always argued, their target in Botswana is not Botswana, which on and by itself really is a very weak industrial power. Industrial power. They are waiting to intervene against the Black working class in South Africa, where the mines and where the industrial base, and the investments are actually located. So we obviously stand with the struggles in America, and I think what we need to be able to say, Steve, is when we're approaching the MayDay, so the working class is struggling, and I think more and more, consciously learning from each other. I can tell you, for instance, when there was an Occupy movement in 2010 in the US, we had a student Occupy movement here and so on. And clearly, young people who are, connected across all over the world in social media, they're learning. And I think the way in which the lessons are passed from one section of the working class in one country to the other is much more rapid than I think at any given point in time, certainly since Marx and other pioneers of the socialist movement began to organize the working class on an international basis. But I think the task that face myself and you and other international socialists across the world is how do we consciously organize and build those linkages. And one of the things that we have done, and I'm very proud of that as an achievement of our union, was to build direct links between Clover workers and the new trade unions in Palestine itself. So we are talking more. We are, more and more joining forces. Having joined, we've had joint platforms. We've invited them to come to our meetings. Sometimes even, small farmers that are facing evictions there. We've shared platforms. I think more 3, 4, 5 times in a period of few months, and we want to encourage more of that. We are obviously engaging with a number of trade unionists, in Manchester, in UK, and of course we've been engaging with yourself in the US, number of comrades in Brazil. And that is in addition, obviously, to international socialist movements that we belong to. So I do think that how we build on this, but also other initiatives that are taking place to make sure that there's much more conscious international coordination and working class, direct working class solidarity to support immediate struggles that are taking place is going to be much more important. For me, MayDay that we're approaching must be a day of a worldwide gender strike of the working class against, the deepening, poverty of the working class, against the brutalization that is a key feature of how the ruling class is responding to this crisis in its cruel and, of course, disparate determination to offload the burden of the crisis on the shoulders of the ordinary working class people, who bears no responsibility for this crisis. So, for me, instead of the usual celebrations and so on, we must be very deliberate. We must be able to say, MayDay is a day of a worldwide struggle. I mean, it's a worldwide gender strike, of the working class over, better conditions of employment across the world, but also against the worsening conditions of life for the working class people at all levels and in all countries across the world.
And one of the issues is the role of the AFL-CIO in the United States. The AFL-CIO, with the CIA, helped fund Chief Buthelezi, his labor group, and these Buthelezi forces attacked trade unionists in COSATU. That they murdered families, trade unionists, and attacked unions. There's an effort in the United States to open the books of the AFL-CIO operations in El Salvador and Chile, in South Africa, and also compensation to trade unions who were killed and their families by this AFL-CIO CIA operation in South Africa. What's your view about the AFL-CIO working with the CIA in South Africa, intervening against COSATU, against the independent unions in South Africa?
I mean, I think that has been one of the most, scandalous and I think criminal betrayal of the working class solidarity, that you had a section of the workers' movement supporting the butchers of the workers' movement here in South Africa. I mean, Buthelezi and his IFP gangs played a terrible role, of course, in trying to arrest the tides of working class revolt against apartheid and capitalism in this country. And a number of activists were killed, particularly in KZN, and that for me is a chapter in the history of the American working class, which, by the way, has quite a proud history. I mean, all the days including the MayDay, we derive it from there, and I think that chapter needs to be examined, and I think they need to be able to reckon with it, more so because we keep hearing the stories of how FL and CO, CIO funded projects across the world are used to actually defeat and destabilize, certain progressive developments within workers' movement and promoting a pro-capitalist interest. Now, I mean, South Africa, there's certainly wariness about their role, or even getting support of any of their organizations, and I think that, to me, is something that the American working class in particular has to reflect on, because if we are going to build solidarity, it has to be on the basis that is solidarity and unity, of struggle, the struggle against capitalism, the struggle against imperialism. And for that, we have to free and liberate our movement of any alien class and, of course, hostile interest. And any person that is responsible for that need to be held to account, dead or alive. And they need to open the books. They need to say who did what, because workers here were killed for fighting apartheid. Workers here were killed for trying to rise on their feet against capitalism. And that is a worst crime and a worst betrayal that any workers' movement can commit, by supporting such activities.
And the other issue is we're going towards a world war, and capitalism historically, when it goes into crisis, one of the ways it tries to solve its crisis is by going to war with other countries. And while the Palestinians are being bombed today as we speak in Gaza, they're being blown up by Israeli jets. The United States is very concerned about Ukraine and spending billions of dollars to send military weapons to Ukraine. It seems like they have an unlimited budget. I don't know where the money's coming from. They haven't even appropriated it, but apparently that they have billions for more weapons to Ukraine. And NATO now wants to encircle and is encircling Russia, but also they're moving to encircle China. This is creating a massive global crisis, not just for the people of Ukraine who are being used like cannon fodder with the invasion, but also of Russia, but also the effect of famine because of the food production in the Ukraine and Russia, which is going to be affecting South Africa, affecting the world. What is the view of your union and working people in South Africa around this new war that the United States is leading with the European capitalists?
So, I mean, firstly, I mean, we obviously differ with the government here, who, as you know, through BRICS, are aligned with Putin in Russia. We do think that the invasion of Ukraine is a war of aggression insofar as we are concerned, but also we are very clear that it's not only Russian imperialism. The US and the NATO, that is the European imperialism, are very much responsible for that brutal war that is now being visited primarily on the people of Ukraine, but for which the working class across the world, I mean, is paying the price. Just to give you a sense, I think I've already mentioned the price of oil here, which has increased by 2%, petrol, a liter of petrol, 37 diesel, and I mean 52%. And obviously, oil is a primary input, and that is raising the levels of inflation, of every other commodity in the market. But also we are increasingly facing a shortage, but also a crisis of cooking oil that is also, I mean, I think for which, from what I gather, we rely on Ukraine, and I mean that is one of the basic food here, and I think the working class is certainly paying for that. And I mean, I can go on and on with other things. Of course, sections of imperialism here are benefiting, like the rise in the prices of the platinum group metals. One of the most rarest but also valuable mineral resource in the world is rhodium. That is the most scarce in the whole world. South Africa produces about 60% of it. The second is the most expensive even than gold, than platinum. The second producer is Russia with 10%. Now the price of it has went up to a point that Anglo Platinum, for instance, that we're currently organizing around, has seen over 100% increase in their earnings last year alone. Their earnings, before tax, interest, and depreciation was 49 billion in 2020. It increased to over 108 billion last year in 2021. They have, the value of their shares has increased from, I think, 115% to over 300 rand per share. That is about 200% increase. The return on capital employed by 108% as well. 130%. And I mean, what did they do? They simply handed over 80 billion in dividend to a handful of their shareholders that will not even fill the room where you are at the moment. In the context of mining that is taking place in communities that are devastated by an astronomical levels of unemployment, of poverty. There's absolutely no development, nothing. And the most scandalous and criminal thing is that the ANC is allowing that. The ANC is protecting them. The ANC, is deploying the police here to guard their assets when the communities are revolting. But of course, the soldiers in a number of African countries where Anglo-Platinum is involved. I mean, my law firm here is involved in a case where we are supporting, community in I think it's Zambia, in Kwabe, where Anglo-Platinum has devastated the land of that community and so on. So we are taking that as on the international case. That is in addition, of course, to supporting the communities that are organizing in my home area against Anglo-Platinum. And what did they do? They were in London last week celebrating, a great year that they have when the black working class here is suffering, and of course is paying the price not only in levels of unemployment, in poverty and lack of development, but also is beginning to turn against each other. That the elements of civil war are developing within the black working class, as we've seen with the xenophobic violence, but increasingly the divisions, but also, as I was saying, the tearing apart of the very fabric of society in many communities, and that's the biggest problem. So the war, I think, for me, in Ukraine, that's what it means to the working class and so on. But I think even more so than ever before, we are faced, and I think we've never come as close as we are now to the real threat of a third world war than in a very long time, certainly since the Cuban missiles, the Cuban missile crisis, before this. And I think what we must be very clear about is that the capitalist class imperialism has no solutions. It does not matter how many conferences we're going to have. The reality is that this is a struggle over the world market. This is a struggle for domination, for power, for contestation between various sections of the imperialism, the old established Western imperialism, but also the rising power of Russia, of China. Russia is recovering from the post-Soviet collapse. And I think, as it was beginning to take more or displace, particularly the US imperialism in the Middle East, in the Balkans, obviously they're reacting to that. They are trying to contain China in Asia, but also their influence here in Africa. And that is a real basis for, almost unavoidable development towards the third world war. I mean, it is scandalous, Comrade Steve, that the only hope that we have to avert the third world war is a fear of the threat of nuclear annihilation. I mean, how absurd that our sole hope is that the fear of mutual annihilation through nuclear weapons is what would stop them on their tracks. Now, the only way, to overcome this situation is by overthrowing imperialism itself. Because capitalism, particularly in this period of the crisis, the key feature of which, as we've seen, is overproduction, it's overcapacity, and I think the struggle for markets. I mean, I was looking recently on the figures, that China was responsible for world production of steel 5% in 1985. Today, they are somewhere at over 55%. And that is the reason that, the European, capitalism, have been protesting and literally putting them on rations, the US as well. And I think that has also devastated the steel manufacturing here. So is that struggle for world market that is behind all this, madness that is risking annihilation and, of course, an extinction, because that's what a nuclear war would entail, the extinction of our entire civilization. I can't see how, the world would simply return to normality in the aftermath of the war involving nuclear weapons and arsenal that we have. So the working class has to organize, the working class has to coordinate, but more than that, the working class need mass political parties in each country and a new mass international that is armed with the ideas, with the program of revolutionary socialism to overthrow capitalism, first and foremost in those countries where we organize, but with a perspective to spreading that across the world to overthrow world imperialism, because you cannot overthrow capitalism and sustain that victory in isolation. Capitalism is a system of global production, and that's the reason that genuine socialism, genuine working class struggle is international or nothing.
And we're speaking with Memetlwe Sebei. He's the president of the General Industrial Workers Union of South Africa. And last, I wanted to talk to you about what is going on in Namibia, next to South Africa, where the mines have been taken over, the uranium mines have been taken over by Chinese investors, Chinese National Nuclear Corporation. They fired the union leadership at Rossing, and are trying to break the unions and bring back contract labor in Namibia, which, like South Africa, faced apartheid conditions with contract labor. And there was a big struggle in Namibia against contract labor for the liberation of the working class. It seems that the Chinese, like other investors, want to exploit the resources of Africa without really protecting the workers' interests, the unions in Namibia. What's your view about that struggle of the Rossing miners and the fight for unity between the South African working class and the Namibian working class?
I mean, there are many people on the left who, look at China as an alternative, as a model, if you like, of a successful, and they call it post-capitalist society. And that can be far from the truth, right? The reality is that, of course, there was revolution in China. Of course, that revolution, overthrew, capitalism in 1948. And, we argue that it was probably following October, and arguably, a second most important event in the history of the working class. But ever since that, for the past three decades or so, we've seen counter-revolution, we've seen reversal, we've seen restoration of capitalism. And I think in the conditions of China, and in the late capitalism, where basically the only way that China, could find as well as fight for its place, in the world capitalism, in the world market, is through the most brutal forms of exploitation. And we see that not only in Namibia, by the way, but also here in South Africa. I mean, the Chinese-owned company are known for being the most notorious. And it seems that it's a story across the whole continent, because we see video clips that are going viral of even various, officials from various African governments having to go and do inspections in Chinese-owned companies, and even they, being some of the most corrupt section of the world bourgeois class, having to, protest at the appalling conditions of the workers. So the struggle in Namibia, in that sense, is not isolated. The struggle is in a context of the revolt by the working class here in Southern Africa against the growing Chinese imperialism, which has in many ways actually displaced American imperialism. I mean, their growing domination of South Africa. I mean, I think they're the biggest trading partner of South Africa. They are displacing more and more companies in the mining, Western companies in the mining industry. They are owning some of our banks. The biggest, one of the biggest bank here, Standard Bank, is owned by the state, by the Chinese state-owned Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, and so on. So there are a big imperialist factor here, and of course, their model of capitalism is much more ruthless. And that's the issue that, as a left, we've got to reckon with. But more than that, not reckoning with in terms of just how it impacts us, but what is really happening in China itself. Counter-revolution is in full swing in China. The gains of that revolutions are under attack from the Chinese Communist Party bureaucracy. Now particularly under Jinping, elements of reaction, Chinese nationalism, racism are growing, but also, the authoritarian tendencies have strengthened. And I think these are things that we've got to confront and not be blinded by the rhetoric about going back to the Marxist classics and all that gibberish that is coming out of the bureaucracy that side. The reality is, we need to build direct links. We need to build solidarity with the Chinese working class, which is fighting itself, which is, doing its best to build independent organizations. We've also seen young people in Hong Kong rising in a movement which, of course, imperialism has tried to hijack, which, of course, in many ways is also, influenced a lot by liberal, elements, what they call the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong and all the things and so on. Now, of course, the solution to that is rebuilding independent organizations of the Chinese working class that can also, of course, aid and support the struggles of all of us here that are struggling with Chinese imperialism in South Africa, but I think also in Namibia. Now, the Namibian struggle requires, and I think need us, particularly here in South Africa, with our relatively bigger unions and resources to be able to support them. I've certainly raised the issue with the leadership of SAFTU when the strike first emerged, and we've been, sending some back and forth messages, but I think nothing much has come of that because soon after that strike broke out, I've just been involved and overwhelmed by the struggle at Clover at one time or the other. But I think with the new tactic that we are adopting insofar as Clover is concerned, we need to get back to that struggle. That struggle is absolutely very vital because I think we are going to see more and more of that element where, as the capitalist class in this phase of the crisis is now forced to take on the heavy battalions of the working class, having cut to the bone the most vulnerable through neoliberal structuring and precarious forms of employment in the past, and that leaving them with very little, if any, space for further cuts. To go against the heavy battalions of the working class, like the mine workers, like the Clover workers, like the workers in petroleum industry, they are going to have to go after the labor movement itself, because these are the workers that have and remain the mainstays of the labor movement. And the attack on the trade unions, in Namibia, of the trade union leadership in the mine is, of course, increasingly a feature of the, industrial, or rather a policy towards industrial relation, the overhauling and overthrowal, if you like, of a collective bargaining architecture that was put by the capitalist class in the previous period. They are going after that. The anti-labor laws that are being passed here in this country, but I think across many jurisdictions, is also the feature of the period. The working class must defend its movements. The working class must defend its sections under attack. We must actually, for me, adopt, if you like, the Stalingrad approach, where we defend every inch of the ground to make it difficult for the working class, for the capitalist class to attack any of our section without a drawn-out, all-out battle like the one that we've given them in Clover. I have absolutely no regret for the fight that we've put in Clover, regardless of the outcome of it, because even Clover management understand that to introduce another round of attacks, what they are on against, and I think that has also sent a message across the capitalist class everywhere.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for talking with us about these issues of life and death for the working class, not just in South Africa, but all over the world, China, Asia, Europe. It's an international struggle. So I think we can join together on May Day globally and fight for unity of the working class worldwide, because it seems that is the only solution for the survival of working people, the survival of humanity in this world.
I agree, Steve. Once again, let's remind ourselves and let's emphasize the fact that May Day is not a day of celebration. It's a day of a worldwide general strike of the working class, because for as long as we are under capitalism, we are slaves, and therefore we must fight a liberation, the liberation of the working class, which will only be possible on the basis of socialism and overthrowal of worldwide imperialism and global capitalism. Mandla, thank you.
Okay, take care. This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and you've been listening to an interview with Memetlwe Sebei, who is president of the General Industrial Workers of South Africa.